So, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of CloudBites Conversations, where I'm really excited to be joined by Gaurav Kheterpal. Gaurav is a Salesforce MVP Hall of Fame member. He is a MuleSoft ambassador. He has done so much community work that it's unreal. He's a mainstay at all the big events. He's been in keynotes and all sorts, as we'll discuss later. So I'm really pleased to have Gaurav here. So welcome to the show, Gaurav.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's my pleasure to be here.
No, it's my pleasure to have you here. I was when I first started coming up with the podcast list, I had a list of about 30, 40 names, and yours was like right near the top. We've just, you and I keep on missing each other between Dreamforce and events and illness and things like that. So I'm glad we finally got to sit down for a bit and have a good chat. So let's start off by talking a bit about where you come from, how you got into the Salesforce industry, because as much as I'm pretty sure 90% of people listening will know who you are. For that 10%, that small margin of people that haven't seen you out and about somewhere, tell us a little about yourself, Gaurav, and how you got started with Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in a small tier 2 city in India called Jaipur, which is now actually called the Salesforce capital of India because it has kind of like come up like really big on Salesforce. But my Salesforce journey started in 2007. Prior to that, I was a software developer, primarily working on systems programming, things like protocol stacks, device drivers, and I really enjoyed that. It was a lot of programming in languages like C, even assembly language, and I also worked for a deployment engineer for in the early part of my career. I lived in France for some time, working for telecom operators. So did that fun stuff. 2007, I moved back to Jaipur, which is my hometown, to be closer to my family, and that's where Salesforce actually started. I did taste Salesforce a little bit earlier because, like, in my previous company, they were kind of contemplating using Salesforce as a customer to manage their leads and CRM systems. But yeah, 2007 was when it really started, and I think initial impressions were horrible. I will be very transparent and honest because I was doing programming language like assembly language
Yeah,
and C programming, and then all of a sudden I was told that you need to code in the browser, which is something I'd
yeah,
never done in my life. So I would say I would say I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it either. But I think over a period of time, I think it got to me that this is a different world, and I started appreciating the nuances and then I think one thing led to the other. I started off as a developer, became a tech lead, led a Salesforce practice, joined a mid-sized company as a CTO, and then last year January I started my own company. So overall, it's been a great journey. But if I look back at how it started, I would just say it was meant to be. Yeah. So
yeah. It's so there's a couple of really interesting things in that. So first of all, anyone who has not been to Jaipur, it is a wonderful place. I was at India Dreaming a few years back, where I think in fact we bumped into each other at
yes,
India Dreaming a
yeah,
few years
yeah.
back. And so we had a couple of days there. We went to Jaipur and saw the Red Palace. Is it?
Amer Fort.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was it. Yeah,
yeah.
it was absolutely amazing. So anyone who has not been to Jaipur, I can thoroughly recommend it. Absolutely brilliant place. And you said you lived in France. So whereabouts in France do you speak French?
It was so I'm old. So this was almost 24 years back.
Yeah,
I remember a little bit of French, like I can get a basic conversation started in French. But beyond that, I've forgotten. I lived in Normandy in a place called Rennes, which is a beautiful
yeah.
university town for a large part of that duration. And then I also lived in Vélizy, which is outskirts of Paris, for almost 6 months. And it was a lot of fun. Like I was young and I wanted to travel and see the world and big on like European football and things like that. So I really enjoyed it.
Cool. Did you adopt a football team then when you were in?
Oh yeah, so I was French, so it had to be PSG, so
That's
Paris
it.
Saint Germain. So yeah,
Well, I mean, Rennes have a good team over at Rennes. They're not a bad side there. So yeah, that's very cool. It's I think it's always fun when people kind of get to live somewhere different and experience a different culture and you'll be surprised at French. We'll have to get you a French Touch Dreaming, giving a presentation in French in a couple of years. That'll be good to
Yeah,
see.
hopefully I go back. I've visited UK and several other countries, but for whatever reasons, I've never been able to go back to France. So it's almost due for 20 years. So I hope to make that trip sometime.
There you go. There you go. Definitely a good idea. Definitely a good idea. So you mentioned as well that your initial views of Salesforce were less than positive, is what we'll say. Is that and I think this is a really kind of interesting conversation because um, I find depending upon what your background is and how you came into Salesforce, I think really strongly changes your opinions of it. So um, I came in very much from, although I've done a bit of kind of local application programming beforehand. I was working on .NET server systems and Java server systems, very kind of ASP, JSP. And so for me, when I moved to Salesforce, I was kind of already partly moving towards a cloud model anyway, because people were slowly getting the idea of like Azure and things like an AWS. But um, the biggest thing for me that I loved about it was I never had to write a login page or like deal with
Mhm,
user. I just remember spending hours doing that. Whereas I've got some friends and people like yourself who have come across it from systems programming and what I have always viewed as more hardcore engineering. Like when you're writing an assembly, you're actually doing real kind of
yeah,
hardcore stuff, not just
yeah,
moving a button around a screen.
yeah.
And yeah, I think it's really interesting. Excuse me, really interesting that you have that opinion or had that opinion based upon that. And I suppose as a follow up, then how long did it take for you to kind of go, aha, I get this. Like and because I mean you've been working with Salesforce now for about 15, 20 years.
17,
Seven,
17 years. Yeah,
17
yeah,
years. So I'm pretty confident in saying, and if not, this is going to be a massive exclusive, but that you think that the platform's worth spending time investing on. If not, you're going to really, if not, your career is going to take a very different tangent now. But
absolutely. Oh,
yeah,
I
at what
think.
point did you kind of feel like it was where you wanted to spend the rest of your career?
Yeah, yeah, I think initially, obviously, like it was a decision which I think, as I told, I think it kind of happened by chance because before I entered Salesforce, the last company I was working was we were a fax over IP startup. So if you remember those early 2005, 2006 timeframes,
Yeah,
voice over IP was very big. Like everybody wanted like to make calls on the internet, and we were working on an idea which suggested like fax will not die and fax over IP will be the next big thing. So I actually went to US for some time. We were building out a prototype. We did that, and eventually, I think as fate would have it, and I was lucky that I had to move to my hometown, so I quit that. Fax never really went anywhere. It actually died down much quicker than anybody imagined. And then that's where the Salesforce journey started. Initially it was a struggle, I would say, for about 6 months. Like I was like, what am I doing? Like I've kind of spent 6 years doing the best jobs in the world, like traveled the world, and then I am uh, in a small company and doing things which I never wanted to do. But I think when I started realizing how big the potential was, and when I started kind of looking beyond projects, I think that's when it kind of struck me. And I think the community also played a massive impact, I would say. I think initially I got engaged very very quickly, like on developer.force.com I used to write articles as well, contribute stuff, and that feeling of appreciation I think meant a lot to me. And I think if you get that early enough in an ecosystem, it kind of binds you to that ecosystem for a long time. And I think that played a big role for me.
yeah, that's a very good point because I think that I think that one of the things that is often perhaps overlooked by, because especially by, I'm going to say, those of us that are more cheerleaders within the system, the ecosystem. Yeah, I, um, I'd hope that I'd never describe myself too much as a cheerleader because I just don't like the thought of it. Yeah, I'm sure you've been at more than one MVP event where the likes of, there's a few of me and you
Yep.
and, a couple of others stood at the back quietly whilst there's a bunch of
Yeah.
people up front roaring. But I think one of the things that you've hit on there that perhaps is not recognized enough is that a lot of the people that are really excited or super excited about it have had a career grow through it at the same time and been engaged when it was a small group. Um, I remember going to my first developer group and meeting the likes of Keir and Wes Nolte and Nup and other people like that who I'd seen write all this stuff online. And my first
Absolutely.
boss was Andy Fawcett, who now is a very very high powered sort of VP at
Yeah.
Salesforce. He was just Andy who was working with, and I think it's got to be quite difficult now if you're coming into the ecosystem to find that same sort of spot, if you know what I mean. Like you kind of feel like a fish in a much bigger pool, if that makes sense, rather than being a fish in a much smaller one.
100%. I think like uh, the landscape has completely changed. Like a lot of people are now content creators. I think it's very easy to kind of produce content now. It's also very easy to kind of make it visible. And you're right. I mean, when I started off, like I still remember to learn Apex, I had to read a book which was that fix Apex programming. And then again, like learning from people like Andy Fawcett, Kier, who we call as Bob Buzzard is his
Yeah,
code name, and Don Robbins and several others. And again, I think that kind of like really impressed me in terms of this is a special community because like I had been working on other technologies. I had never seen a community like this. And I think a little bit of credit to Salesforce as well. They spotted the opportunity early. I think Erica Cool, she kind of
yeah,
played a very critical role in building that community. But at the same time, I always say I'm not a cheerleader for Salesforce. Like I appreciate all the good things they do, but if they don't do anything which is right, either from a community perspective, from a partner perspective, or in general, I'm very vocal about it, and sometimes I've gotten into trouble for that as well. But that's okay. Like I think that is I think the kind of stakeholders you want to have in an ecosystem, because if everybody is a cheerleader, then obviously there is something drastically wrong. So
yeah. I do think that's a good point that a lot of people also don't see sometimes with MVPs is that I have seen a lot of MVPs who you would think are the most vocal, ardent, diehard Salesforce fans are really often the ones that are the most vocally, kind of giving constructive criticism is what I say in the background, but like in a very, very firm and assertive way. Um, but they do it in the right way, which is to do it in the background quietly,
absolutely.
rather than we've all remember some of the phone calls that we've had with kind of product managers where they feel that they've gone through the rigor on things. It is a really good point. I think one of the things I've said before as well that I think echoes what you were saying is that when I first started, I think it was a lot easier to create content as well because Salesforce Salesforce wasn't brilliant everywhere. And what I mean by
Yeah,
that is like there was a lot of rough edges. So like it was very easy to write a blog post about the bleeding edge of technology because literally everywhere was the bleeding edge of
yeah,
it was oh look, I'm going to go do this because you can't do it because there isn't a system to do it. We've
yeah,
all written blog posts about trigger frameworks or messaging systems and all this stuff because they just didn't exist. So
yeah.
I do think that's a big part of it as well.
Absolutely. I think you're right. So, for example, I remember like initially when they launched the mobile SDK, they had just like a couple of pages of documentation and that's it. And you could not really build a comprehensive mobile app. And that was, I think, also one of the uh, I think moments where I realized I can contribute a lot more. So I
Mm.
wrote several articles, published a lot of blogs, built a lot of sample applications as well. And I think those opportunities kind of also helped me kind of like grow further in the ecosystem. Now I think the platform is very, very diverse. Again, I think generative AI is also changing a lot of things. Like there is a lot of content available, but I think again you need to kind of pick and choose what you want to consume and what you want to rather avoid. So
Yeah, I know that's it. Yeah, the generative AI. I think there's two things about generative AI that are a couple of things. Like one is that I think it's from a content creation perspective, and in being involved in that content process, you have to be very careful that there is that authority or there's the work done on it, because it's very, I could go into chat GPT now and say, write me a blog post about working with this API, and me never have touched the API at all. And I think there's some concerns around that. I think as well from the product perspective, there's both that piece of it being very, very cool and exciting in Agent Force, which is going to be a very big thing that Salesforce have released. And I'm not really sure yet how. I'll be very honest. I'm not sure how much traction it's going to get. And I know that Salesforce will kind of in the marketing say that everyone's going to have agents running everywhere. But I'll be frank. I'm still a little bit unsure as to how many organizations really want autonomous bots running around answering questions to customers without any sort of not guide rails, but what I'm getting at, and how much
yeah,
people want that. But from a builder perspective, from a developer or an admin perspective, it's going to allow you to do things a lot quicker, but it's how correct it's going to be. And I think there's a really interesting thing that I'd love to hear your opinion as to how you find this as someone leading an organization with a team of people. Is how do you encourage people to use the tools to be more productive, but find a way of maintaining consistency? Because if you ask ChatGPT the same question 3 different times, you'll get 3
yeah,
different answers.
true. Yeah, I think there is a concept of responsible AI. I think that is where I think a lot of people don't really look at that aspect seriously enough. Like for in our like in my organization, at least when we use AI in projects, we make it a point to kind of get an explicit approval from clients. Okay, these are the tools that we will be using, like tools like Otter to kind of transcribe calls. If we are using other tools to kind of help write any code like copilots or anything else, like we are fairly explicit about it. It is a massive time saver. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But I think again, it is also like garbage in, garbage out. So if you are feeding it the wrong information, you will obviously get the wrong output as well. So I think that is number one. And then second, on Agent Force, I think whatever I've seen at Dreamforce, and I looked at did a little bit of hands-on as well. I think from a technology perspective, it's very impressive. I think, but there are two things which will kind of define adoption: is how well can kind of Salesforce align that to typical use cases of all the products that they have. Second is, I think they really need to get the pricing of it right. I think we are hearing that it might be consumption based, but again, there have been products where Salesforce has tried a few different things, hasn't really worked because the pricing didn't quite fit. So that is the other thing. But like there is immense potential, but I think it's very early, at least the way I see it, it's very, very early in the life cycle to say that it's the next big game changer or it will kind of rewrite everything. So
Yeah, it's and that thing about the pricing, the consumption, and the kind of the structure around it in general, I think is where my hesitance will always be with these pieces, because I feel like I still see so many people struggling to get decent data in Salesforce, let alone kind of as you say, garbage in, garbage out. If you go into, we've all seen customers that have hundreds of thousands of duplicate leads and contacts.
yeah,
How are they going to work with that data? So it's an exciting time for sure. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done. And I think it's also interesting because there's so many organizations out there doing stuff with AI that it's very hard at the moment to know what's going on. Because as an example, I know that one of the things that I always enjoy seeing on your LinkedIn feed and things like that is that you're quite a broad technologist. You're not I say just Salesforce, but you're not solely focused on Salesforce. I know you work with Azure, I know you work with Google Cloud, I know you work with all of these, and you were in fact in the Google keynote, weren't you, recently in one of the videos, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, I think that was kind of my moment of fame. I I made it finally. But yeah, I think the advantage of working cutting across technologies is that the core concepts are the same. Like whether it's
Mm.
programming, whether it's architecture principles, if you are understanding those principles generic enough, then you can apply those to other uh, technologies as well. And I think I've been very fortunate. Like in one of the previous companies where I was the CTO, I was asked to establish a Google Cloud practice. That's where my Google Cloud journey started. Similarly, some of the integration spaces, like very specific requirements in specific engagements, like Informatica or Boomi, like again, we needed those for specific use cases in specific projects. So I learned a little bit, but I think what has really helped me is I think being able to kind of correlate things in terms of how I would do this in one platform to the other. And I'm not an expert on most of those platforms, but I know enough to kind of apply those concepts. And
Mm.
generally, I feel that is good enough to kind of at least help solve the basic problems. And the Google keynote, I think it kind of just happened. Like I think they kind of wanted to showcase something around AI specifically for India. They reached out. I said yes. They took us to a studio. They shot a video, and yeah, that was my moment of fame.
I mean, you need to get yourself on IMDb for it. It's you need your credit up there. I know uh, Francis Pinder, who I know you must you know through the community. He has,
Yeah.
I think he genuinely has a credit for being in Harry Potter on
Oh wow.
IMDb. Yeah, it's so you've got to you and Francis are now like the two top people in the Salesforce ecosystem for having been on global stage, on non-Salesforce related global stages for videos. It's yeah, so that's cool. I mean, I think the point you make there about the correlating ideas across technology is an interesting one as well, because one of the things that I think has helped me in my career is the fact that I was self-taught. So I've not done an official. When did I last do a programming course? For anyone who was watching me and Peter code along on a live stream yesterday, they'll probably not believe that I've ever done any programming courses. But I think I did one at like high school, and then I didn't do any programming at university. And things like that. So I learned how to code and how to develop on my own with some great mentors still, but largely self-taught. But I learned the fundamentals of technology. I was very big into learning how to build my own server, how to run my own network, how to do all these things. And I think that that's really helped me, because when it comes to how do I set up a custom experience cloud site with its domain going somewhere and have it connecting in different places. I understand the underlying technology, so I go, that makes sense. Whereas I think for a lot of new people coming into the ecosystem now, there's so many layers of abstraction away on things that they probably don't see that in the same level. So I don't know. I mean, have you found, because obviously you were doing systems engineering and real low level stuff. So do you think that that's made it easier to kind of, because you understand that the kind of base level underground?
I think a lot of it is like learning by doing. I think there is no substitute to it. And I think if you do that, if you try things out at your own, those concepts kind of stick. So I've always kind of liked doing that. Like even like within Salesforce, there are clouds which I don't really know well enough, but I have spent a lot of time, like at least when I get time, like spinning up like a IDO or an SDO org, a demo org, and just trying to see how things are working. So I think if you are curious and if you try things in a hands-on manner, I think that is generally a big help. Uh, with computer science, like I did study computer science in university, so that was an added advantage. My wife is a professor; she teaches computer science, so
Oh, wow.
it, yeah. And my daughter is kind of ramping up to be a computer science graduate as well. So we have a little bit in the family as well. But I think, yeah, in general, like I think if you kind of focus on learning the concepts and try doing things, you might break a few things, but yeah, that's how you learn, and that's how you learn for good. So
Well, that's really cool having, and it's a real family of computer scientists there. So Yeah, no, I completely agree that having that base understanding and you say trying and playing with things for listeners that don't know the two acronyms you just said, could you share what you mean by an IDO and an SDO?
Absolutely. So SDO is a simple demo org, and an IDO is an industry demo org. So, for example, let's say you want to learn financial services cloud. So, if you work for a Salesforce partner, there is something called Partner Learning Camp where you can just go in. You can spin up like an industry demo org IDO, and I think it's called IDO FSC or something like that. You just request it. It gives you a demo org. It's not just an org with FSC installed on it. What Salesforce has again done really well, credit to them. They've actually created demo scripts. So if, for example, I want to understand how FSC works for insurance, there is a demo script for that. All the demo data is there. Some of the key functionality is there. I can actually go through it step by step and I can see how it works. SDO is similarly a demo org, but not for Salesforce industry products. It is like if you, let's say, want to learn um, Pardot. No, Pardot may be a bad example. Maybe Health Cloud or something else, which
Yeah,
is not
Einstein
relevant on
Bots.
industries. Yeah. So again, there are orgs available for that as well. So you can always request an SDO, and then I think they come with 3 month or 1 month kind of validity. But if you're a partner, you can always get it extended, and that's a great way to kind of learn new clouds as well within Salesforce.
So there you go. It's the top tip if you're a Salesforce partner to be able to go and get one of those orgs to work with. So with the one of the things you mentioned a minute ago is that you've moved over the past year to being a CEO and a founder of your own company. But just before we dive into that, you part of your journey, as you say, is having done lots and lots of different roles on the way. So you've been a developer, you've done work with the mobile SDK and been a mobile architect, mobile lead, you've been a CTO. So can you just, and obviously now you're a CEO. So can you just talk us through that journey, what it was like doing these different roles, what made you kind of go up that pathway? Because one of the things that I'm always keen to impress upon people starting out is that you don't have to want to end up being a CEO. And this is, and I know I'm saying this as me, who is the CEO of a partner, to another CEO of another partner, who have both done this journey, gone through it. But that doesn't have to be your end goal to kind of run your own company or be a TA or be a you can just be what you want to be. So how's that journey been for you, and kind of what were the best parts, what were the worst parts, what did you love and what did you hate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if, as I said, like 2007, when I started my Salesforce journey, if somebody would have asked me, like, would you be running a company 17 years later and running your own Salesforce consulting firm? Not even in my dreams. But I think you never know where life takes you. Uh, as I said, like I started off as a developer, became a module lead, again started appreciating like how powerful Salesforce development was back in those days, Apex, Visual Force, or LWC. So a natural progression in that sense. Uh, I really enjoyed my role when I joined another partner as a CTO. I think that was my first C-level role. It actually gave me exposure to how do you operate at a big scale. It was a company based in headquartered in US with presence in India, Australia, and US. And I had teams like everywhere, like in all three locations. I was literally like, how do you run a global team and how do you handle that pressure? Work with big clients. Still remember like one of the projects like Parker Harris was one of the executive stakeholders from Salesforce on a vaccine management call for NYC. Never forget that moment. I reminded him when I met him at Dreamforce, and yeah, he said he remembered it. Uh, but yeah, I think those kind of things have stuck around, and I think one of the things which has kind of helped me in that journey is like I'm somebody who likes to learn, somebody who likes to read. You might see a lot of books behind me. I'm a
Mm.
ardent reader. Like I love books and in general spending time up reading about things. If people do that, I think that helps. I think the CEO thing, it just, I would say, I happened by chance. I think I wasn't really planning for it. I gave it some thought. I thought maybe it's too late. I'm too old to do that. But then in the last couple of companies, I saw things which I did not like people were being let go, some decisions which were I principally did not agree with. And I was 45 and I thought if I have to start a company, it has to be now or
Hmm.
never. So I decided I'll kind of take a chance, do it for 2 years. If it doesn't work out, I'll find another job. But that's what it's so far it's working out well. So I don't really regret that decision.
No, that's good. That, and it's. I think that there's someone in a sort of similar-ish position. When about 18 months ago, the organization I was working at decided it was shutting down, and I was on the C-suite there, and again had that thing of what am I going to do? There is, it's we are both very lucky that we are in positions where we were able to say, okay, I'll give it a try for 2 years, and if not,
Yeah.
I'll go back and get another job. And it's not everyone that could do that, but I do think that there is a big part of that is having the. I think there's two big things. One of it is having the security around you to be able to do so. I think that
Yeah.
outside of in the US, I think for some reason it's different where people are like, I've got $5, I'm going to go start a company and it will be, Apple. And there's just a different VC model out there and things like that. But I think especially in in the UK and other areas, there is a much bigger jump. I don't know how you felt, but like I felt on my end that had I not, I'm very lucky that I'm married and my wife has a good job and works hard, and we don't have any dependents and things like that. And as you were saying, your daughters are probably at age now where you're not needing to worry as much, and but
Yeah.
it is a big scary thing. So all credit to you for doing it, because I do feel that I know how hard that decision can be.
No, no, absolutely. I think it's a big leap of faith. I think it's after marriage and having kids. I think it's the biggest decision I've taken in my life, and I think it's a bumpy ride. Like there are good parts to it, there are bad parts to it, and there are really ugly parts to it. But I think once you kind of decide that you're on the journey, there is no looking back. So I think you have to kind of the game has started, so you need to play. I think, or the other option is you quit and kind of go back to what you were doing earlier. So I think it's very gratifying in the sense that you kind of make your own decisions, you establish the own culture that you wanted to do. So in that sense, it's really good. But also like things like you need to meet the payroll, the business kind of goes up and down. So people have issues with each other, those kind of things. It's a mixed bag. So all of it you need to kind of deal with.
Yeah, definitely. So, what would you say is your favorite thing about being a CEO and a founder, and what would you say is your least favorite thing? Because, from my perspective, my favorite thing is definitely that kind of ability to do what I find interesting and what I want to do. I'm again fortunate and lucky enough that I have turned work down where I'm like, that's not that doesn't pique my interest. It's not what I want to spend time on. Um, and I love that ability. I the one thing that I find difficult sometimes is having having the many hats. I love wearing many hats, but also having that, what it's like, because you must sit there like me and go, you look at your to-do list and it just keeps on going and going and going. So
Yeah,
those would be my two things. But anyway, what's your favorite thing and what's your least favorite thing?
I think my favorite thing is, as I said, the flexibility to build an organization which I always dreamed of, like establishing the culture. So, for example, at Panshiv, uh, we call it as a learning centric or a learning first company. Like everybody is encouraged to upskill and learn new things. There is no limitation in terms of how many trainings or how many certifications you want to do. There is no cap. We don't really put a cap on that. I think that is one. Second is like sensitivity to people, and in terms of like how we treat them. I think that is again something which I have always wanted to do a little bit differently. But like other companies where I worked, they had certain policies. You can do this, you can't do this. So I think overall those things are what I really relish, like every single day. I think I always say like my company is not the the best paymaster. We don't break the bank to pay people, but what we always provide is like a good learning culture and ability where people can actually build their careers. I think that is very gratifying to me. What I don't really like, I think definitely what you said, like sometimes I just struggle to devote time on things that I personally want to do. So I think that is always a constant struggle. Uh, yeah, because like again, I still am hands-on, like the fancy title CEO apart. Like I still work on projects. I'm leading a large enterprise project right now, which is something which I really enjoy. So I think that is uh, sometimes I kind of not able to spend the time. The only other thing is I would say, like as I said, it's a bumpy ride. So
Mm.
sometimes you're on top of the world, you're doing great, everything is well, like business is booming. Sometimes like there are factors you can't control and things kind of slow down, and then you start to worry, okay, I have all these people in my team, what if things go further south? So I think that is what really worries me a little bit. But like so far I've planned it out reasonably well, that if push comes to shove, like we'll still be able to survive and grow. But yeah, you always have that as a founder in the back of your mind, like what if something goes wrong? So
Yeah, it's very it's very hard to disconnect your mind from that feeling
yeah,
of oh what about next week's pay?
yeah,
What about this year? Is I had an instance not that long ago where so I have two organizations. I have one where I do consulting work, and I have my ISV partner where I have my app, and it's a constant balance of A, spending enough time building on the app and keeping that going, and B, kind
yeah,
of bring enough money in to pay the mortgage and keep things going there. But I had this thing a few weeks ago where I was sat down and kind of I was like, all right, I'm just about at the right balance at the moment. I've got more than enough hours consulting wise to keep me going. I've got enough time to develop on this, and I've got some exciting updates coming. And then this project came in, and someone was like, "Oh, could we just get you?" And I was like, "For how much?" And they asked, and they told me, and I was like, "I can't do it." And I was like, "I really want to
yeah,
say yes, but I can't say yes because of these things." But equal, and I just remember sitting there with my wife and being like, "It's a very hard thing to turn down money, like
yeah,
because I think as a founder as well, you have to have a certain amount of I hate the term hustle, but hustle. You
yeah,
have to sit there and if someone says to you, "Here's a project that you could do for £1,000," you'll go, "Yes, I'll take it £1,000." And it is that thing of then constantly having that fear of, oh, but what if that's the £1,000 I needed? What if
mhm,
it is and and not knowing whether things are going to work out, but like spending time doing advertising and marketing and things like that, and it's just it just
yeah,
feels sometimes like you're screaming into an abyss and no one knows. So it
absolutely.
can be funny.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
interesting that you.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, the other thing is like sometimes it can actually be a very lonely journey. Like you're kind of in your own struggles. You don't want to really bother your family about it, and sometimes it feels like if I'd probably not done this, my life would be a lot smoother. It would be much more peaceful. But again, that's a choice, and I always remind myself like the gloomy days won't last and the bright days won't last. So I think it's how you take it, like one day at a time. And if you do that, and if you keep your head between your shoulders, I think yeah. So far the journey has been good, and I'm hoping that is how we'll continue.
Yeah, there's there's a video that I've seen before, which is a bunch of the only person I can remember for definite on there is Tom Hanks, but it's a bunch. I think it's like Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington, a bunch of very very kind of experienced, famous actors, and sort of it was Tom Hanks just saying that you've got to remember that this too shall pass. It's like you win an Oscar,
Yeah,
this too shall pass. You lose something, this too, and it's having that balance to say it's all temporary, it's all
yeah,
only going to go on. I was gonna say I think it's really good as well that you still stay hands on working on projects and doing so because I think that's going to give you an interesting perspective as to what your team are thinking. Because one of the things that I think can be very I in a previous role I was definitely far more kind of managerial than hands-on. I was still doing one or two, but it was very hard, I found, to like actually feel what things were like on the ground. And it's only
Yeah,
when I think sometimes when you have a certain level of experience, you can come into a project and there be a problem, but because you've dealt with such a problem before, you could just come in and go, okay, everyone relax, we've got this, it's fine.
yeah,
And that, whereas if you're too far out, you could, sending an email saying everyone needs to fix this,
yeah.
it's going to be okay, is very much harder. So do you find that
No,
as
no,
well with different
absolutely.
team members?
100%. I think like practice what you preach. I think so. I think just the fact that like I'm kind of still hands-on and I'm still technical and I contribute to things. I think it is a big help for me personally as well as for the company, like for my teams as well. Like sometimes they will get stuck, they'll reach out not only for the teams but also it gives our clients a lot of confidence. Like if the team is not able to solve it, they have somebody within the organization who can guide them, and then we can come out of that situation. And also like sometimes like I would just do random reviews just to check on projects in terms of how the team is doing. I'll catch a few things. I'll ask them to fix it. That is also how the team learns. So I personally think that a hands-on founder for any organization is a massive advantage. Obviously I don't have the best business acumen, but I personally think like you can kind of live with it if you understand technology well enough, and if you are in the business of technology, having like a good technological background definitely helps you. So
Yeah, definitely. I think it makes a huge difference for sure. And I think that I think it helps you stay fresh and on top of things, because that's also important. It's very, very I've worked with people who have done sales for me before, and they just, because they for no fault of their own weren't technology people who understood the technology. It's very easy to end up with misaligned expectations.
yeah,
Whereas, if you're the person who's selling it and also may have to deliver it, it's much easier for you to come in and I used to say this when I was doing sales, is that I am, because you get asked that question, as I'm sure you do a lot of the time, which is, well, you said it's going to take 2 weeks, but is it really going to take 2 weeks? And how do we know it's not going to take a month, that you're just short selling us? And it's very easy when you're the technical guy on there to be like, well, because I'm the one who's got to deliver it in 2 weeks, so I'm telling you that as I'll be the one sat down hands on doing it. I think that makes a huge difference in kind of that confidence for the customer.
oh yeah, absolutely. There's no two ways about it. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
So one of the things that we mentioned at the start is you're an MVP Hall of Fame member. You're also been very heavily involved in community groups and leading community groups. You're also a MuleSoft ambassador and a well architected framework ambassador. So talk us through a little bit around kind of some of these different community roles you've been involved in. What made you get involved with them? What it was like being an MVP, and and really on the well architected framework in particular, because I think that's such an interesting development by Salesforce that was really, really needed, because there was a bunch of people out there talking about architecture, but I didn't feel that there was ever really a central resource until then.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I think the MVP thing first. So again, I think I always looked up to like all the MVPs who were like in the program before me. So obviously, uh, Kier was one of them. Several others, I think, from the early days, and I became an MVP in 2016, and I think you are almost the similar time. Is
I
that
was
right?
2014. I'm just looking up at I've got so let me get this for the screen. There's those of us who entered into the Hall of
Yeah,
Fame got a lovely corkboard. I haven't actually got
yeah,
anything on mine, but it gives you the years on the side, doesn't it?
yeah,
So there
yeah,
you go.
yeah.
I have that
Yes,
up there facing this way, so I can actually remember myself. You see.
yeah. For me, I think it happened in 2016, so and it was a huge honor. I think I had been in the community for almost 9 years by then, so I think what caught me there was I think a combination of multiple things. Like was very active on Stack Exchange, on developer forums, was presenting at Dreamforce since 2012. Um, yeah, and I think kind of doing a lot of things. I was leading the Jaipur developer group at that time, and then when Salesforce started architect groups, I left the developer group and moved over to the architect groups. But I think it's a fantastic program, the MVP program. Like I've met some of the brightest minds of Salesforce ecosystem in that program, including you. So it's been a huge honor, and I think the real value that I kind of see out of that program is again the ability to kind of provide feedback, influence things, and just the some of the other privileges that MVPs get, like access to product managers, and being able to kind of provide that feedback right to Salesforce, and they take it very seriously. I think that is a big advantage. MuleSoft ambassador, I think slightly different journey. I started working on MuleSoft. I think the first project was in 2015. I worked on that project, and then there was no MuleSoft work for like almost 2 3 years, and then I kind of picked it up again in 2018. Ambassador is the equivalent of a Salesforce MVP, very similar program. It's just that it's in two stages. You become a MuleSoft mentor first, and then you become a MuleSoft ambassador. So I've again been very fortunate to present a lot of sessions on MuleSoft at Dreamforce and TDX, and a lot of other community events as well. Again, a very vibrant community of individuals. I think again, MuleSoft is kind of MuleSoft community is actually doing really well. Very strong community, and I love being a part of that ambassador community. As far as architect group, being an architect group leader, like again, I'm very attached to my city, Jaipur. As I said, I ran the developer group here. When Salesforce established the architect groups, they actually asked me, would you want to start the architect group? And
Mm-hmm.
because I work as an architect, that is something which was like, absolutely, I'll do it. And lastly, the well architected ambassador, that's an initiative by the Salesforce architect relations team, Zane Turner and her team. And I've been very fortunate. Like I've been a part of this program from the the moment it started. I'm actually wearing the well architected
There we
ambassador
go. Look at
T-shirt.
that.
Purely a coincidence. But I think Salesforce had this huge gap, and I think I'm glad that they kind of worked on fixing it. Like there was no well architected framework for Salesforce for several years. Amazon, AWS had it, Google Cloud had it, Azure had it. Salesforce, they started off with a framework called SOGAF, which was similar to the enterprise architecture framework TOGAF. I think they eventually rebranded it to well architected. It's been evolving. Like we just delivered a few workshops on well architected at Dreamforce. I've done a number of these at other events as well. I think the framework is in a very mature stage, but there is absolutely more work that can be done. But like I personally really am a big fan of the work that team is doing, and I'm really hoping they get more budget and they do a lot more than what is currently available. Because if you are a Salesforce architect, there are possibly 10 different ways to do the same thing. Some of it is good, some of it is as per best practices, some of it may turn into a horror story. So the more education and enablement there can be around that, I think the better it is.
Yeah, I think the well architected framework is one of those things that I remember because the framework came out what 4 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, 4 years, 4 years.
Yeah,
I
4 years
think,
ago.
yeah, roughly 3 to 4 years. Yeah.
And I remember sort of prior to that was when I was in a role where I was still considering going for like the CTA and going down that path. And I remember sort of having these really good conversations with people who were CTAs, with people who were looking at because the new the architect exam pyramid that I still
Pyramid.
call
Yeah.
new, despite that also being 6 7 years old now. But probably more than that. But there was a lot of conversations around these pieces where I think those of us that had been doing architecture roles and enterprise architecture roles sometimes found the nature of the Salesforce certifications is very Salesforce focused, and
Narrow.
I
Yeah.
I joke with people that if you're doing a Salesforce exam and you don't know which answer it is, it's the one that has the Salesforce product in it. It's if you're trying on the multiple choice and you want to know what the right answer is, it's the buy the Salesforce product answer. That's always the best one to go for. And I think that there's definitely a place where that well architected framework came in and just sort of established a good set of base principles around it. And one of the interesting things that we had Jodie Herbeck on the podcast a while ago, and one of the things that she said that really resonated with me was that I think she said it, or it's in her book, or both, but is that everyone on Salesforce really is an architect, and I think that that's such an interesting point in that if you're an admin and if you're a solo admin in an org and you're creating the data model and sorting out the logic around the business process, you're an admin. You're an architect. That's exactly what architecture is. It is thinking about how things fit together in
Yeah.
the whole. And you might be an enterprise architect that's working with 7 different systems and integrations and sync timing and all these things and security and identity and everything else. But that's equally as valid an architect role as an admin who is looking after their org themselves and just making the right decisions. And so I think that framework really is one of those things that everyone should look at. But I do, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is do you think that the problem that it is labeled as an architecture framework means that perhaps other people who should read it don't read it?
Oh no, that is something which I think I tell my team all the time. Like even the developers, like if you go to architect.salesforce.com, there is a ton of resources there beyond these the well architected framework and the 3 subtenants. Like they have some of these decision guides. Like for
Mm.
example, I want to do an outbound integration. As a developer, there are multiple mechanisms to do that based on certain decision points or based on certain criteria and based on the use case. What is it I should use? And that decision guide is actually a table. It actually talks you through, like, okay, maybe you want to do a synchronous integration, maybe you are doing it for a large data volume use case. Depending on those scenarios, it actually tells you these are some of the patterns which are a good fit, these are some things which you should rule out. So again, there are those patterns, anti patterns, which are available, which are relevant for developers and absolutely for admins as well. So I think it's a great resource, probably a very underrated resource and labeled as architect resource, but 100%, I think everybody kind of should be familiar with those. So.
Yeah, and I think that it's sort of, this leads nicely into another kind of talking point, which is one of the interesting discussions is what I'll use as the term, but fights that is out there in the Salesforce space at the moment is still people fighting over flow versus Apex, rather than realizing that they're meant to work together in harmony. There's still a lot of I don't use Apex, I write it all in one flow, or you should never write flow, you should just do it in one Apex. And yesterday on the live stream that Peter Chittum and I were doing, we had the discussion around the idea of an org smell. So rather than a code smell, which is obviously just a very technical thing, is you have this idea of an org smell. It's like, well, actually, is your org following the best patterns? Does your org, does it have a lot of duplicates? Is it brittle? Does it have is it fast to execute and things like this? And I think there's a really interesting kind of discussion point around that. But with the advent of more powerful low code tools, one of the things that I've always found a challenge around them is that I've always wanted to enable people to use them, because I think the best code is the code that you don't write. That's the best bit of functionality is the functionality. The best feature is the one where you don't do any automation for it. Less code, less flow, anything you can do where you do, if you can do it in a formula field or in a dynamic field on a page, do it that way. But when you have to do it, I think that the one fear I have is that background of best practice. And I feel this acutely as someone who didn't do computer science and had to learn the hard way about this is what good code should be or shouldn't be. This is what a good pattern is or isn't. There is still anyone who's seen any of my code will tell you that there's still a bunch of things I do wrong all the damn time in it, and I'm fine with that. But for an admin or a functional consultant who hasn't gone through that understanding of actually writing code, sometimes logically organizing a flow can be quite difficult, and you see these anti-patterns. So one of the things I know you've got involved in as well or helped found, I think, is the Low Code Security Alliance. So can you tell me a little bit about about the alliance, about what its goals are, what its aims are, and kind of why it was set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is an initiative by Andrew Davis. He works as, I think he's the chief product officer at AutoRabbit. And AutoRabbit is like a very popular DevOps platform. So I think it was a couple of months back, or maybe in July, that Andrew reached out that this is an initiative that they are planning. They kind of picked 14 people with varying backgrounds and vast Salesforce experience to be a
Mm-hmm.
part of this alliance. So it's basically like a, I would say, an alliance of these 14 members who are contributing and who have like some knowledge of Salesforce and security as well. The idea is to kind of publish artifacts like um, uh, white papers and other literature, and maybe some sample codes as well, videos as well, in terms of how you should be doing this, and kind of help do some standardization, because in Salesforce, especially when it comes to security, again, there are multiple ways of doing things. You could be writing Apex code which could be leaking data, you may not be aware. While that may be written somewhere hidden in the documentation, the idea is to kind of build some standards around it, and then also kind of see how we can actually help uh, do some compliance around it as well. Because again, there have been breaches uh, due to poorly written code or poorly implemented security policies. So the idea is to kind of come up with an come up with an initiative which can kind of serve as a sounding board for some of these security challenges in Salesforce, and also kind of help guide the broader ecosystem in terms of how to do things. I'll be very transparent. Like, I am a part of Low Code Security Alliance. I've probably not contributed enough in terms of how much I should have, because this happened just before Dreamforce and I had a million things to finish. But there are a lot of other members, Matt Myers, I think you know him, and several others, uh, Jason as well, and several others who've kind of been very, very keenly involved. I'll definitely step up in the coming weeks. But yeah, I think the first white paper went out just before Dreamforce. I picked up a hard copy for myself at Dreamforce as well. And I think in general, it's the No Code Security Alliance is receiving like some really good feedback, and I think some constructive feedback as well in terms of how they should do things. So I'm excited for what holds in the future for that.
No, it seems good. I have actually downloaded their white paper myself to read through. So I'll have a look at that, and I'm sure it'll be full of good information. Because I think one of the interesting things that's out there now that I was thinking about the other day is just the number of ways in which people open their system up to external actors that they don't even think about. And a good one that popped into my head is bots. So now with Einstein Bots, there's a requirement in some of the later releases to have a custom bot user rather than just ideally use a custom bot user rather than standard bot user. But it's also most bots go away and they do things like retrieve contact information or retrieve order information. It's how you kind of make it so that it's doing that in a secure manner, so that
Sure.
and especially with kind of AI and kind of chat recognition, is that you don't end up with someone just saying, "Hi, can you tell me all of the orders that were placed last week, please?" and it just dump them
Yeah.
out or something. And obviously, I'm coming up with a very extreme example there, but I think we do have to be really careful about how what permissions and sharing we grant to a
Yeah.
bot, because on the one hand you feel like it needs to be able to see all contacts to be able to create cases for them, but on the other hand you're like, do I really want it to be able to see all contacts? How do I manage that? So I'm really pro a lot of these initiatives, because I think it's very easy to open things up without realizing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of times, like admins and developers, typically they would do certain things like, let's maybe open it up for now, and we'll kind of handle this later. And we all know that later never really comes. So I've seen similar things when I've done audits of orgs, like horror stories in terms of, no, 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 this is not, this is like, you should not be doing this. And so I think again, the initiative is kind of aimed at educating people, but very early days. I think it's a promising start, but a lot of work still needs to be done.
Oh, definitely. So, um, I mean, this brings us nicely, I suppose, to a point where I can ask, what are you? So we've discussed kind of how you got into Salesforce, how you've evolved, your roles over the time, and kind of the different pieces you've done, and some of the work you're now working on. So, I'm going to say what's next for you, because I know, obviously, I imagine that a lot of it's going to be focused on Vanshiv. Is that where your primary focus is now, and some of the low code security alliance? But what's next for you, really, then, Gaurav?
Like again, I think yeah. So OneShift is obviously like it's going to be a big focus area for me for the next few years. Other than that, I think the only thing which I want to kind of focus on is staying relevant and upskilling, so I can contribute again to projects, to our customers as well. I think those are the big focus areas for me. If I'm able to kind of find time to kind of balance things and continue my learnings and as well as run OneShift in an efficient manner, those are the only two things I need in life. So I think if I can make that happen, then I'll be a very happy person.
That's a very, very good set of things to want to keep happening and want to make work. So, well, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me today. I've had a fantastic time having this conversation, because you've just got so much experience in the ecosystem and have covered so many areas that I'm sure that the listeners have learned as much as I have, particularly around things such as that learning model of how you can think about the base parts and translating it. I think that's something that I'm definitely going to take away and think about how I can help, how when I'm trying to share things with people, I can use that model to say to them, this and this are equivalent, and this is the underlying piece. That was an extremely good way of thinking about things, and definitely going to go away and read that low code white paper and pieces like that. So one of the things that I do ask every single guest we have is to share a tip for our listeners, and this can be based upon what we've discussed today. It can be just a tip about a particular. It could be a tool. It could be a career tip, but just something that they can take away and action this afternoon or this morning, whenever they're listening right now, that will help them. So, what would your tip be then, Gaurav?
Yeah, my only tip would be like take it one day at a time when it comes to your learning. I meet a lot of people, like I interview a lot of people, and I come across a lot of people at community events who are struggling because I think they see it as an uphill battle. Like sometimes the mountain is not as high or as difficult to climb as it seems. There's a lot of competition. There is absolutely no doubt about it. People who will learn and who will upskill will kind of stay relevant. But I think if you kind of make learning as a daily habit, 30 minutes per day, block it off on your calendar, do that without fail. It's a very underrated. Uh, it's a very underrated thought. Most people, they would study for hours and hours for 1 week and then not do anything for 2 months or 3 months. I think that doesn't help if you're not consistent. But if you make learning as a habit of your daily life, that has worked wonders for me, and I have seen a lot of people which have actually transformed their careers just by learning something new or kind of reinforcing some concepts on a daily basis. So that is something which I would suggest, like devote some time for your personal learning on a daily basis, and you will not even realize how much it will help you in your career as well as in your life as well.
That's a fantastic tip. It's one that I've during COVID, in fact, I made a habit of trying to make sure I just spent 15-20 minutes reading every day, because I used to read a lot as a teenager and younger. I just got out of the habit, and it just shocked me as to how much just doing that every day ballooned into me flying through books and reading a lot more. So it's a perfect idea. Thank you so much again, Gaurav, for coming and for talking to us today. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and if you've been watching, for watching. Remember to, if you've enjoyed this, to leave a like. If you've got a particular thing or a highlight that was from this conversation today, please leave it in the comments below. Remember to subscribe to the channel or to the podcast on whatever podcast provider you use. And just once again, thank you, Gaurav, for a wonderful conversation today.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and I'll speak to you on the next episode.